we started to hear in the last session, which was so focused right at the community and the family level, about big data around these issues. And I think that's the macro scale that we're swooshing out to right now. And this panel, Strengthening Data Systems to Measure Population Level Impacts, will really look at these questions at a macro scale and population level scale. It will be moderated by an old hat in the sector, Hani Mansourian, and I forgot to bring up my biography, so I'm just going to have to wing it in introducing Hani. You notice that he filled in for Craig, but Hani has been part of the child protection and family welfare sector for many years, and the capacity in which I got to know him was as a rapid response team member for the Global Child Protection Working Group, which is now morphing into something new. But Hani really was the go-to guy for child protection rapid assessments and how do you create the data and use it to figure out in emergency situations what your child protection program should look at. And he's somebody who is very dedicated to the idea that research around children and families can and should be used. And he has many more credits to his name, so I would recommend that you look him up in the biography list. With no further ado, Hani Mansourian.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Yes, it's a packed session, especially with some translation that we're going to have. We are just to first give a shout out to Lindsay if she's watching us. We're hoping to have Lindsay on this panel to present part of the work on estimating a number of children outside of family care in Cambodia, but unfortunately she's not with us. So we are hoping that she will watch this whole session. But she's replaced by Beth, who is, if not as much, if not more, as much of a fundamental component of this research, and has been very intimately involved in all of the processes. We also have in this panel an additional component that we haven't had in the previous panels. We just looked at the complexity of all these the work that has gone into these presentations that are going to be made here, and we thought there's way too much brain here for me alone to handle. So we asked Florence to come on board as well as a discussant. So once we finish the presentations, we'll basically open it up to Florence right before we open it up for questions and comments. Florence will help us kind of give us some discussion points, basically. Tell us potentially critiquing, potentially kind of pointing to things that we should think about more in these research, and then we'll open for discussion. I will not individually introduce everyone now. I'll get to it at the point of their presentation, just to save time. So we'll start with the birth registration component, which Santi, who you all know, will be presenting. As for those who may have been absent yesterday, I'll quickly mention Santi's biography and kind of background. Santi is the co-director. Where are you, Santi? Is the co-director of Puskapa, which is the Center on Child Protection at the University of Indonesia. She has been working, she's a development specialist with a lot of experience in public policy research and model interventions, particularly on protection and well-being of children. Her work focuses on social protection, access to justice to address vulnerability affecting children and families. In 2009, she co-founded the center, Puskapa, which is part of the CPC affiliated network. She has done a lot of work before this as a lecturer and in the Department of Criminology, which is something I didn't know about Santi, which is And also she has worked with UNICEF for many years in Indonesia. So she has a lot of experience and knowledge to share. And on top of that, she's now doing her PhD here or the DRPH here in the Department of Population and Family. With no further ado, I'll ask Santi to tell us about birth registration.
Thank you, Hani. Hello, everyone. Okay, so before I begin, I would like to tell you what my presentation will not do. So my presentation will not be talking in details about methodology, unlike maybe the ones before me and the ones after me, but rather it will try to present to you a collection of main findings from our work through a number of research we have been doing since 2012 on this particular issue. And I will try to present the main recommendations that the center is continuously advocate for and help implement. So, okay, so we named our research basically to back to what counts. And in addition to birth registration, I will also be talking a little bit about death registration in Indonesia, because we want to start with where we begin and where we will all end up, which is death. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So this is a little bit about Indonesia. So Indonesia is only the 16th largest by landmass, but unfortunately, 80% of our areas are prone to natural disaster. Lucky us. We are the 4th largest by population, and it means we have more than 250 million people, and about a third of them are children. We are a lower middle income country by income status, with widening inequality. We have about 96 million people living in poverty, and more than 23 million of them are children. We are new democracy, and we are going through a keep changing decentralization process. So administratively, we consist of 34 provinces, more than 500 districts, and more than 74,000 villages. And because of the islands, you can imagine the challenges in terms of access and infrastructure. We are a country of 17,500 islands during low tide and 13,500 during high tide. Okay, so I hope that give all of us pretty much, some ideas about the country. And I'm just gonna highlight the 3 main priorities that the government is now focusing on. One is to reduce poverty, of course. We're still at 11% or 10 point something percent. But Fifi will later, after lunch, will be talking in more detail about the poverty situation, as well as all the programs in trying to address the problems. The government needs to address vulnerability, and the government needs to prevent shocks from pushing more people to poverty throughout the life cycle. So all of these require the government to know and understand the population it serves. And this information is supposed to be provided by a system called the Civil Registration and Vital Statistics, or CRVS, which at least it's a continuous, compulsory, universal way of reporting and recording vital events in people's life, which includes birth, marriage, divorce, migration, adoption, death, and causes of death. So in principle, a CRVS system, a functioning CRVS system, will not only provide individuals with legal identity documents that would facilitate them to access basic services, but also at the same time, it will produce an accurate vital statistics of the population. And the vital statistics of the population should inform public policy for them to be able to allocate resources and service delivery where it's most needed. But, so looking all through that, we tried to provide a number of research, and these were basically the things that we have been doing in the past 4 years. So we did a systematic literature review. We looked over 500 publications. We did legal review. We did a Delphi exercise where we assessed the agreement and disagreement level between policymakers on particularly birth registration and death registration issue. We did a number of household surveys. We did key informant interviews, and we did focus group discussions with a participatory ranking exercise as well. Okay, so the main findings are, in my country, the CRVS system is far from universal because we still have about 37% children unregistered. This is according to the socioeconomic survey, the national data that we analyzed. More than 60% of them come from the poorest families. We do not have a national data set that would tell us about marriage registration coverage, but through a number of household survey, we found that more than half of marriages, especially amongst the poor, were unregistered, and 75% of their children didn't have a birth certificate. Only 2% of people who claim that they have divorced have a divorce certificate. There is no official data on death registration coverage, but according to some officials in the Ministry of Home Affairs, this is unofficial statement, they only cover around 7% of death registration. From our survey, we found that 84% of deaths still took place at home, and only 2% of them registered the event. So it is a very tiny proportion. The causes of death data in our country is generated from a number of different surveys and census and modeling and projection data, which of course then cannot be generalized, cannot be used to scale down the information down to village level. It only can be generalizable at the national level. The second main finding is that there is no singular CRVS system in this country. As you can see, for each different vital event, it involves many different ministries. But overall, it's the Ministry of Home Affairs who have the authority to do civil registration. But in each event, there's a health ministry, there's a religious ministry, a justice ministry, court, and social affairs ministry, at least. And in Indonesia, a child can only be registered under the father's and the mother's name if the parents have a legal marriage. So that creates another problem. Okay, so in terms of barriers from our surveys, from our study, we found that basically the main barrier is the cost of the whole process. It's expensive. It's very difficult to reach the civil registration office at district level. The process is very complicated, and of course, because parents didn't have a legal marriage. And it is still consistent in our recent finding in 2015. The above information came from 2013 survey. Okay, to add to the complication, the civil registration is separated from the population registry. So the system that creates a single identification number, maybe it's the same with social security number here, is completely separated from the civil registration system. And this population registry issued your single identification number as a citizen. It then issued a family card for you and a national ID card for over 17 years old. The unfortunate thing about this is that these last two documents are the main requirements to access social assistance programs. So as you can see, then we cannot really build incentive opportunities from linking civil registration with actual benefit from the government. Okay, then these numbers then also further shows that some of the poorest are still deprived of accessing social assistances, because even still, like 15% of families, mostly the poorest, didn't have the family card. More than 27% of adults didn't have the national ID card. And this is just an example of how everything is not interlinked. So we just launched our universal health coverage program, and we found from the program data that more than 42 million of participants of that health insurance program still did not have a single identification number. And more than 16 million of them are premium subsidy recipients, meaning the poorest of the poor. Okay, so from this series of studies, we also found that efforts have mostly been running in silos and with very little resources. One, we observed that in a number of existing programs trying to assist the government with this issue, there's been too much focus on birth certificate as the outcome, and it really then it has very little to do with then pushing the government to really look at CRVS as a whole system. And the attention has been mostly focusing on barriers from the supply side, which end up the government keeps making new regulation and policies without the actual realization of the regulation. There's very little demand from the health sector, and this is one of the main barriers, and also very little demand from the social protection sector, because each sector will be using their own data that they're collecting from different surveys and census. And also, I think us as a sector has not been doing much in pushing for that demand to come from the health sector especially. Then it creates a parallel, intersect, or overlap mechanisms. Like, for example, for death registration, there's this mechanism where the health sector would use community health workers up to the district level health clinics and up to the central level, while Home Affairs Ministry would have their own way of registering death using the community structure that is available. And it seems like it's always a trade-off between, improving your civil registration versus improving your vital statistics. It seems like it's always like, okay, then the vital statistics can wait because we only need to have everyone be having a birth certificate, for example, but not entering the information to the actual population registry. Okay, so I'm just gonna skip this. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. This came out from our 2013 study, which we argue that the lack of legal identity document is actually the face of poverty, and it created a national cross-sectorial buy-in, which we considered a priority, because the government then put legal identity as one of the national priorities for poverty reduction in their midterm development plan 2015-2019. And we're still continuing to do what we can to build up more milestones. And basically our final goal is to improve the CRVS system. Still a long way to go. And these are some of the main recommendations that we are currently advocating for and help implement. One is we need to remove all the fees and all the barriers that people are facing in order to be able to increase the civil registration seeking behavior from the population. We need to increase demand by creating incentives, but making sure that when we create incentive, it does not really deny more people from accessing basic services, because people also still do not have a legal identity document, a lot of people. We need to bring services closer to communities. It does not make any sense to have the authority at district level while we have 72,000 villages in the country. So it needs to be brought down to community level, making sure that everything's integrated, not happening at the same time, and people can access them regularly. We also thinking that it needs to be integrated to existing services. From our research, the most potential frontline points are birth assistance services, antenatal services, immunization, and family planning services. And in education sector, it's the ECD centers at the community level. The last thing that we are recommending is that we also notice and observe that there's many programs pushing for the application of different technology. We believe that technology should be a part of the solution, but we need to make sure that any technology implemented should link the subsystems of CRVS. So it's civil registration, the body of statistics, and health sector, and also broader development sector. So we are still in the beginning of piloting this intervention, and hopefully 2 years from now, when we meet again, I will be able to report to you the impact of what we've done. But at least we envision that this program is successful when, at output level, there's an increase in vital events being reported, registered, and documented in a form of relevant legal identity documents, namely birth certificate, death certificate, single identification number, etc. At outcome level, there should be an increased coverage of vital events that are registered, increase the use of basic services facility in health and education, and increase of the use of vital data being used for planning and budgeting. And at impact level, we should also be able to see an improved population well-being, because the assumption is that when programs and services are better planned and allocated using a population data, then the quality of population well-being should also be increased. I think that's, thank you.
Thank you very much, Santi. Is this working? Yeah. It was a beautiful presentation, I thought, kind of going back to some of the questions that have been asked in the previous panels of how you connect research to policy. I mean, the case was so clearly made using evidence of why this issue is important. First, what the problem is. Why is it important to address? What are the bottlenecks? How can we resolve the bottlenecks? And then having a clear kind of ask at the end, saying these are the things that we want to achieve. And it will, I mean, having it so clear from the get-go will basically, hopefully, ensure that it's an achievable goal. And yes, so we're looking forward to hearing about it in 2 years. The next speaker that we have is Dr. Alain Ouedraogo. Did I say it correctly? Great. Dr. Ouedraogo is the president of Burkina Faso Program Learning Group, the PLG, the Scientific Advisory Committee, a function in which he has provided methodological feedback to a number of child protection and family welfare studies. He also serves as a responsible for research in the Institut des Sciences des Sociétés, which is part of the Centre National pour la Recherche Scientifique et Technique. And he speaks multiple languages. I believe today we'll hear from him in French with translation by Mark. So we'll allocate a little bit more time.
As if you guys haven't seen enough of me.
We'll allocate a little bit more time than usual to this presentation to account for translation. Dr. Ouedraogo has a lot of other kind of associations attached to his name, so I would encourage you to read the bio. So with no further ado, I'll ask Dr. Ouedraogo to speak to us about the distilling child protection indicators within a national survey in the context of Burkina Faso.
I think that one of the other things that is worth mentioning is he was the first Secretary General of the National Fund for Scientific Research and Innovation for Development. And so the government of Burkina Faso has very clearly made evidence-based development practice a priority, and he was at the head of that. À vous, Alain.
OK. Merci, Marc. Et comme je le Comme il le dit, mon étude va porter sur l'harmonisation des indicateurs et des mécanismes de collecte des données sur la protection et la promotion des droits de l'enfant au Burkina Faso.
My study will talk about the harmonization of indicators and data collection mechanisms for child protection and child rights promotion in Burkina.
Et c'est une étude qui a été commanditée par le Conseil de l'enfant du Burkina Faso.
This study was ordered or commissioned by the Conseil de l'Enfant, the National Child Council,
Financé par l'UNICEF
funded by UNICEF
et réalisé par le CRVS.
and undertaken by CRVS.
Ok, voici le plan de ma présentation. Il y a la présentation générale de l'étude, la méthodologie de travail, la présentation des principaux résultats et enfin la conclusion.
My presentation will have an overview, then the work methodology, the primary results, and a conclusion.
Donc, la présentation générale et le contexte et la justification. D'abord, je vais énoncer les raisons qui ont guidé le CN à commander cette étude.
These are the reasons that we commissioned this study.
Il y a la pluralité d'indicateurs, de mécanismes et d'outils de collecte, de traitement et de diffusion des données.
There's a plethora of indicators, of ways of collecting these indicators, and data collection tools, as well as different ways of analyzing different indicators.
La multitude d'acteurs, secteur privé, secteur public, PTF et OSC.
There are many actors working in child protection and well-being, both public and private, donors, community-based organizations.
Manque de concertation entre les acteurs de la protection et de la promotion des droits des enfants.
There was no agreement or discussion between actors working on child protection and child rights promotion.
Et le besoin de parvenir à une harmonisation des indicateurs et des mécanismes de collecte des données dans le domaine de la protection et de la promotion des droits des enfants.
So we needed to harmonize the indicators that we wanted to measure as well as the data collection mechanisms for those working in child protection and child well-being.
Et comme objectif, c'est surtout d'identifier et recouper tous les indicateurs existants afin de déterminer les indicateurs minimums pour la collecte des données.
The objectives of the study were to identify and triangulate the existing indicators to be able to determine which minimum ones should be in various data collection mechanisms.
Identifier, répertorier et analyser tous les mécanismes et dispositifs utilisés actuellement pour la collecte et la gestion et proposer un mécanisme approprié au Conseil national des enfants.
So we wanted to identify, create a repertory, and analyze the various data collection mechanisms that were being used to learn about child protection and well-being within the country so that the National Child Council could make use of this.
Élaborer un document national répertoriant et priorisant les indicateurs de protection et de promotion des droits de l'enfant.
So we created a document that demonstrated this repertory and prioritized certain indicators for measurement of child protection and well-being.
Analyser les mécanismes et les dispositifs en tenant compte du niveau national, mais aussi déconcentré, ainsi que les outils y adhérents pour la collecte, la gestion et la diffusion des données.
We also wanted to make sure that we were looking at data collection mechanisms that were happening or being used at the national level as well as the decentralized level.
Identifier les lacunes et les besoins au niveau des opérateurs de collecte de données.
Identify gaps and needs for those who are actually doing data collection in various ways.
Et enfin, faire des recommandations aux acteurs travaillant dans le domaine pour renforcer la qualité, l'efficacité, la synergie et la complémentarité des actions.
Make recommendations to actors working in these fields to reinforce the quality, efficacy, synergy, and complementarity of their efforts.
Et comme méthodologie du travail, et c'est surtout, il y a eu la rencontre de cadrage, la revue documentaire et l'élaboration et la validation des outils de collecte.
This is an overview of the methodology. Gotta love those beautiful French words like rencontre de cadrage. Steering meeting that ran into a literature review to be revenue.
Okay. Et
and into the development of this repertory.
la zone de couverture et les critères de rétention des indicateurs
So the zone that it was covered and the criteria for including the inclusion criteria for indicators.
Et il faut dire que la collecte de données a couvert l'ensemble des terres régions du pays.
Our data collection happened across all 13 regions of the country.
Et les critères qui ont prévalu à la rétention des indicateurs à minima sont des critères combinatoires.
The following combination of criteria were used as inclusion criteria.
Ce sont la fréquence statistique importante,
Important statistical frequency, high statistical frequency.
et l'importance de ces 112 indicateurs recensés en termes de ce qu'ils expriment sur la connaissance de la situation et l'appréciation de l'évolution de cette situation.
The ways in which these 112 indicators that we found as we looked at various data collection mechanisms expressed our understanding of children's living situations, their multiple situations, and how their situations changed.
Bon, mon temps ne me permettra pas de donner tous les détails, mais cette étude a été encadrée par le comité scientifique dont je suis le président.
He's not going to go into the methodology in depth, but this study was also accompanied by an 8-person, I believe, scientific advisory committee that gave methodological feedback along the path.
Donc, je vous présente très rapidement l'analyse des résultats de l'étude.
Here are the results and the analysis.
Donc, d'abord, les indicateurs produits utilisés par les OSC, les structures publiques et les PTF.
The headline is indicators that are published or produced and used by community-based associations, public structures, and technical and financial partners, which is a code for donor and bilateral organizations.
Okay. Et les principaux acteurs produits et utilisés par les OSC, 50 ont été recensés et répartis comme suit.
Of the primary indicators published or produced and used by community-based organizations or civil society organizations, 50 were included in the repertory and divided in the following ways.
Et nous avons des indicateurs corporatistes concernant souvent des programmes et des projets dédiés aux enfants.
So corporatist, meaning linked to the organization, indicators related to the programs and the projects that they're running for children.
Des indicateurs produits et utilisés, mais peu désagrégés, hormis les désagrégations par sexe et par axe.
Indicators that are produced and used, but that have very little disaggregation, other than occasionally disaggregation by sex and age.
Des indicateurs généralement utilisés pour les politiques nationales comme la SCAT, c'est un programme politique au Burkina, et pour certaines conventions comme la CDE et les cadres.
And then you have indicators that are generally used for national policies. C'est quoi la SCAD encore?
C'est un programme national au niveau du Burkina Faso.
Okay, this is a national development policy. And then international conventions like the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the African Charter on Child Rights and Well-being.
Donc, je vais rapidement. Et les indicateurs produits et utilisés par les OSC, les instituts publics et les PTF.
So the indicators produced and used or used by different public structures include
Bon, là, nous avons 112 indicateurs recensés.
112.
Et ce sont des indicateurs utilisés par les structures publiques telles que l'action sociale, l'éducation et la santé.
So these are the indicators that public ministries use, such as social welfare, education,
Et
health.
des indicateurs qui sont reconnus et même adaptés au niveau national.
So these are officially recognized and adopted by national policymakers.
Bon, l'analyse des résultats, je vais aller très rapidement. Les indicateurs produits et utilisés s'apparentent plus à des thèmes qu'à des éléments de mesure.
The indicators that are used, generally speaking, are more related to themes than to measurement.
Bon, les mécanismes de collecte, de saisie, de traitement et de stockage fonctionnent pour la plupart en fonction de la disponibilité des ressources.
Data collection mechanisms, data analysis, and storage mechanisms generally function when resources are made available for data to be stored and collected, stored, and analyzed.
Okay. Les outils de collecte des données, c'est une multitude d'outils qui sont utilisés pour la collecte des données.
Many different tools are used to collect these kinds of information.
Bon, les méthodes de collecte et de saisie de traitement des données, passage du traitement manuel au traitement informatisé.
We're in a period where we are transitioning from manually collected data to IT and in computer-related data collection mechanisms.
Voilà, au niveau de la production, la diffusion et le stockage des données, la plupart des structures rencontrées souffrent du manque d'équipement de diffusion et de stockage des données.
Most of the organizations that we encountered as they were trying to collect data suffered from not having the equipment to store and then share it with the people that they were expected to share it with.
Okay, au niveau des analyses, nous avons les difficultés et les mécanismes de production des indicateurs.
These are difficulties that we encountered concerning data collection on child protection and well-being.
La multitude des indicateurs est non harmonisée.
There are just a lot of different indicators that aren't generally agreed.
Multitude, diversité des partenaires.
A lot of different partners working on different themes.
Manque de ressources humaines, financières et logistiques.
Lack of human, financial, and logistical resources to do this data collection properly.
Absence de manuel de formation et de carnet validé.
The absence of training manuals or templates that are agreed.
Outils souvent volumineux et mal adaptés.
Very long data collection tools that are poorly adapted to the context.
Absence d'outils et de programmes informatiques.
And missing IT-related concerns.
OK, comme proposition pour l'harmonisation, il y a 43 indicateurs à minimum qui ont été retenus.
We proposed 43 minimum indicators that should be included in various development programs.
Indicateurs de vie, survie et développement de l'enfant.
Indicators about the life, survival, and development of the child, of which there are 8.
Indicateurs d'accès aux services sociaux de base.
Indicators about access to basic social services, of which we retain 17.
Indicateurs de protection spécifique.
Protection-specific indicators, of which there are 15.
Indicateurs domaine institutionnel et programmatique.
Indicators related to institutional and programmatic concerns, which were 3.
Et comme proposition toujours pour l'amélioration du traitement, il y a organiser des ateliers d'élaboration et de révision et former les différents acteurs, renforcer les services de traitement pour la dotation en informatique.
So we've proposed that the many actors working on child rights promotion and child protection organize workshops to now move from the agreement on these indicators to common ways of collecting data on them, train actors on using these agreed data collection tools, and make sure that they have the right IT equipment to do so.
Et au niveau de toujours comme proposition, le CNR assurerait le rôle de maître d'œuvre pour le rapport annuel et la revue statistique. La collecte des données pour la construction des indicateurs à minima se fera une fois l'année, au cours de la première quinzaine de novembre. Et pour la diffusion, nous suggérons de retenir le 16 juin pour la présentation de l'état de l'enfant au Burkina Faso.
So they are also proposing that the National Child Council continue to play the role of consolidating the situation report that is an annual statistical update on child rights and child protection each year. They would like to make sure that these data are collected across various government and non-government programs at least once a year. Hopefully by November, so that by 6 months later, there can be a look back on how the previous year did.
Et bon, au niveau de la coordination, nous avons fait des propositions toujours de suivi. Au niveau de la coordination, et que le ministère de l'Action sociale, avec le secrétariat permanent, appuie la partenaire technique Et au niveau de l'exécution des actions, et nous proposons la mise en œuvre des actions à travers des associations locales et internationales qui assurent la supervision et la mise en œuvre des actions.
So, in terms of coordinating data collection, they recommend or propose that the Ministry of Social Welfare act as the central coordinating mechanism for all the many partners who are working with children. In terms of accountability and putting this into place, the regional departments of the Ministry of Social Welfare will make sure that NGOs, community-based associations, and other partners are collecting data in the way that conforms to what has been agreed.
Bon, comme conclusion, les indicateurs qui font l'objet de collecte, de saisie, de traitement et de diffusion sont pour l'essentiel des indicateurs d'activité ou de processus.
In conclusion, a reminder that most of the indicators being collected are process indicators or activity-based indicators and not results.
Ils servent à mettre en évidence les progrès accomplis par les projets et programmes de promotion et de protection des droits de l'enfant.
We really need to move towards demonstrating that our programs and policies for children are working for the children.
Avec la proposition des indicateurs à minima, il y a une route tracée pour la concertation en vue d'une harmonisation des actions.
With these 43 agreed indicators, we've shown the path for coming together around what we would like to measure so that actions can be harmonized across organizations.
Les indicateurs à minima constitueront pour le Burkina Faso et ses partenaires un thermomètre national pour les progrès obtenus ou non en matière de droits et de protection des enfants.
These minimum indicators will serve as a national thermometer to show whether or not we are making progress in ensuring child rights and child protection.
J'en ai fini, je vous remercie.
I have finished. Thank you.
It was very, very interesting. It actually corresponds with some of the activities that the old Child Protection Working Group or the Alliance has been involved with in terms of doing the same thing at the international level and trying to bring all the indicators that exist out there together, try to come up with a set of minimum standards. So I'll be sure to bring some of the learning from here to that group to make sure that we can kind of use them. But very interesting, and also another project which I spoke about yesterday, the monitoring project that we were talking about, does almost the same thing in South Sudan. It has happened where you basically go look at all the indicators that exist in a country and try to distill them to a manageable number and then create the tools that can help you collect the data. So I look forward to kind of seeing how it progresses and learn from you more. Thanks again. And last but not least, we'll be hearing from Beth and Rick about estimating the number of children outside of family care in Cambodia. I will, ladies first, I'll start with Beth. I don't know who is going to go first, but in terms of introduction, I'll go with Beth. Beth is a senior research associate with the CPC Learning Network. A lot of you know Beth. She's passionate about working at the intersection of global health research and practice, which is, again, something that we have been discussing a lot these 2 days. Some of her work focused on developing methods to estimate the scale of children who are separated from their families in humanitarian context, which links to this project as well that is more in development context, generating evidence to inform community interventions aimed at reducing interpersonal household violence. Beth holds a master's degree in public health and a master's degree in business from Johns Hopkins, and currently is a PhD student, a PhD candidate. There's a big difference between those two for those who have done a PhD. She has over 10 years of applied experience in global health and human rights, including prevention of international child trafficking, health system equity in Ghana and Rwanda, and HIV treatment access in South Africa. And then Rick, who for those who don't know Rick, if you look at his bio, you will see that it's a very, very impressive background. He has done a lot of interesting work. He's currently a senior program officer for the Global Alliance for Children and a member of the organization's secretariat team. Before this, he served as a senior technical advisor for monitoring and evaluation and evidence-based practices for assistance to vulnerable children at USAID. In that role, he provided technical leadership to the interagency community to improve monitoring and evaluation of the U.S. government's international assistance for highly vulnerable children. Prior to this, Rick was a consultant on child labor and youth employment, research and evaluation, occupational safety and health, and interagency collaboration, and has led interagency collaboration with U.S. Department of Labor, that's USDOL, right?
Yeah.
CDC, IOL, and others. He holds a master's degree and a doctorate degree from Harvard in public health. I will pass the time to you, and we're looking forward to hearing about it.
Great, thanks, Hani. So hard to get through those bios. So one thing that I'd like to say, it's really good to be back and to talk about this project or this activity. 2 years ago at the last biennial meeting, CPC Network biennial meeting, Lindsay Stark and I gave a similar presentation, but this was just, there were ideas, some methodologies had been proposed, and there was a real opportunity to actually do this work. And now I'd like, we said what we're going to do, and there's actually some results 2 years later. So I think that's good. And I think we all miss Lindsay Stark, but we're very fortunate to have Beth, who actually, I would say that she did the work. So she's perfect to be talking about this. And one thing that I just want to point out that Beth won't speak about is that what she actually did in Cambodia is so impressive. And I was fortunate to be able to see through this because she really embedded this methodology, which, I mean, it's a work in progress. It's testing out something new, but she embedded it within the National Institute of Statistics, managed to bring together multiple industries to begin to define, what it means to be a child outside of family care. UNICEF was involved, some key NGOs, and so anyway, I just wanted to give Beth a little plug here because that's hard to do. And all right. So, but what we're going to do is talk about the background. Do you know how to make it small again? Oh, there we go. I'll give a very brief background. Beth will talk about the meat of the presentation, and then I'll kind of wrap up with a couple of slides related to just the summary and discussion. So as far as background, this project, this activity was really driven out of the U.S. Government Action Plan on Children in Adversity, which has three objectives. One is focused on children not reaching growth and developmental milestones, children outside of family care, and reducing violence and exploitation. And what it says is in priority countries, the U.S. government working with other host governments, other organizations will attempt to achieve these goals, these objectives on a population level. And really focusing on the second objective is where this study came from. It's if a goal was to reduce the number of children living outside of family care at a population level, we needed to know or figure out ways to measure that. And one reason this is very important is because these children are typically left out, or by definition, they're left out of household-based surveys. As my colleague Gillian used to say, they've dropped off the statistical map in a lot of the global discussions of children. And there's been some new sort of research or people looking at or suggesting that they may even represent a quarter, we may be missing a quarter of the lowest wealth quintile by just focusing on household-based surveys. And I think this came up yesterday as well with the Violence Against Children survey, where decisions had to be made, for example, that not to include children in boarding schools. And there are quite a few, I would say, the poorest of the poor that are not being picked up by household-based surveys. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago, we convened a workshop in Washington, D.C. to begin to think about this topic from a measurement perspective. How do you begin to define this? And we came up with a sort of a working title definition, a conceptual framework, and then some methods were proposed on how to begin to create national estimates. And this document was produced, and it's one of the documents that Mark showed yesterday that came out of the CPC network, and where it laid out some different methodologies. And like I said, we had this opportunity to apply this for the first time in Cambodia. And I am going to turn it over to Beth to, before I do that, I'm going to give a little bit of the Cambodian context, one slide. One is that we had this opportunity in Cambodia. It was a priority country under the Action Plan on Children and Diversity. There is a strong commitment by the government, and there still is, to focus on preventing child-family separation. There's a lot of drivers in Cambodia that are sort of impacting that, and also reducing the number of children outside of family care. One of the challenges was that the existing data, it either didn't exist, it was missing, or everyone, including the government, agreed it was inaccurate. And one of the things that's happened over the past year is an initiative called Family Care First, where about 20, 30 organizations have come together, starting to sort of form around a common agenda together with the government, UNICEF, others, and trying to focus on these issues. And I think the data that Beth is going to talk about has played a very big role in getting conversation going, and I think pointing us in the right direction. So finally, one last thing. Sorry. That's a problem with these. Yeah, keeping on your toes. Bottom line is there is a very big interest, and there was a big interest in trying to make visible a lot of the children outside of household-based surveys. Beth.
Thank you, Rick. And yeah, I wanted to thank Rick as well as Neil for really being kind of the vision behind this project, and also for putting in place the structures that, are linking this research activity and making it actionable and making it kind of the driver of the programmatic phase, which is to come, which is what, we were motivated by the entire time. So I'm going to talk in two parts. We had two methodologies, one to estimate the number of children in residential care, and another method to estimate the number of homeless children. So to start, the children in residential care. Okay. So this was very much a collective effort, and it was led by Columbia in conjunction with the National Institute of Statistics, which are a really great partner to have involved in this. And we also got a lot of technical support from a Cambodian consulting group called MLT. And for the homeless component, we partnered with an NGO called Friends International. So those were the key partners up at top. And then in addition, we had a technical working group composed of multiple ministries, the Ministry of Social Affairs, UNICEF, the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Labor. And it was this technical working group that met regularly to review the methods and tools and agree on definitions before data collection began. And this really kind of allowed, UNICEF was a part of that as well, to establish broad buy-in and ownership over the entire process. And all of the funding was provided by USAID through John Snow International. So many thanks to those partners for making this work possible. In terms of site selection, in order to get a national estimate, we didn't have the capacity to visit every institution in Cambodia. So that's par for the course in data collection. We don't, projects generally don't have the time and the money and staff to go everywhere in the country. So therefore, it's common practice to focus on a representative sample of areas, and then to do a really thorough job in those places. So we really focused on making sure in the places we did sample that we were able to do a very comprehensive job. We selected 24 communes using a process called probability proportional to size sampling, and this is kind of the gold standard for representative sampling. It's what's used in DHS and a lot of other surveys, and it ensures that those 24 sites are representative of the rest of Cambodia. So then we worked with the technical working group to establish the definitions that we used for residential care institutions. And we wanted to make sure that our definitions were consistent with the Ministry of Social Affairs and could also easily be used by data collectors in the field to determine if a given facility met criteria. And so the Ministry of Social Affairs isn't necessarily thinking from an operational perspective when they write their definitions. So we wanted to kind of find somewhere between the official national definition and something that was operational. In the end, we agreed that a residential care institution could be defined as any facility where children live and there's at least one full-time staff member, paid or volunteer, whose primary purpose is to provide long-term care for children. So regardless of how an institution self-identified, an institution might say, oh, I'm a boarding school. If they met this criteria, we included them in our study. And then we also defined what a child living in a residential care institution was. And we said that they were anyone who was under the age of 18 who was sleeping in the institution at least 4 nights per week during data collection. And that means, as some of you are probably thinking, we didn't count young adults over 18, but we did count children who lived in institutions during the week, but might have gone home to their families over the weekend. And again, this was, we came to consensus with the technical working group that this was an appropriate place to draw our line. So in all 24 communes, the teams of data collectors conducted key informant interviews with local officials, including the Ministry of Social Affairs and every village chief. Then the data collectors visited every institution in the selected communes, and they did 3 things. First, they interviewed every institution director to learn about the characteristics of the facility. Then they reviewed the registration records. And then finally, they came back again at night and they physically counted the children who were sleeping in, who were having dinner to make sure that the number of the children that were physically present at that time matched the number in the records. So in total, our data collectors visited 122 institutions and counted 3,588 children. And then we took this number and built a statistical model, which for the sake of time, I'm actually going to skip over now, but I'm happy to go into this in more detail. But we took this number and put it into a statistical model and applied the statistical model to other areas outside of our 24 communes where we did not collect data. So using this model, we estimate that there are about 49,000 children that are living in residential care institutions in Cambodia. And this is 4 times more than the previous government estimate of 11,453 children. So put another way, this means that 1 out of 100 children in Cambodia is living in residential care. So we'll have some time during the Q&A to kind of process that, but that's an enormous number. And this is really something that is not this one-off thing happening, but kind of a societal trend with huge implications for family care and for social service needs. So we also interviewed all of the older children in the residential care institutions to get a sense of their characteristics and their well-being. So we did the record review for all children and then did more in-depth interviews with older children who we felt were able to understand the informed consent process required for research. That was the reason we did not interview younger children. And in terms of the demographics from the record review, which has to do with children of all ages, we found that there were a lot more boys than girls in residential care in Cambodia. And we also found that almost all of the children in residential care in Cambodia are school-aged. More than half are between 13 to 17 years of age, and only 4% are under 5 years old. So it's definitely an older population. According to the interview data, with the 13 to 17-year-olds, 4 in 5 children that are in residential care have at least one living parent. So again, these are not true orphans. Orphanhood is not what's driving residential care. We then asked the children what was the reason that they were in residential care. And 3 in 4 children said it was either due to poverty or educational opportunities. So yeah, a very clear picture kind of started to emerge about what was going on. We also saw that children in residential care institutions are attending school at very high levels and also achieving high levels of literacy. Very few children engaged in paid child labor, though about a third were involved in institutional fundraising activities. We don't know how many hours per week the institutional fundraising entails. And we also asked children if they'd been sick in the 30 days prior to the interview. We found relatively low rates of self-reported illness and even lower kind of negligible rates of self-reported injury. We asked children about their sense of safety and trust in the adults that they have contact with, and most said they felt very safe and trusted the adults that they had contact with. Of course, it's important to remember this is based on self-reported data from interviews with children. So the children might have felt pressured to kind of put a positive spin on their experience. And that is a limitation of interview data. We did conduct the interviews in a private space, and we adhered to standards of confidentiality. But at the end of the day, there could have been pressure that children felt. So I'm going to sort of skip over the strengths and weaknesses because we're kind of tight on time, so that I have a little bit of a chance to quickly go over our homeless results. But the main strengths was that we were going to quite transparent about our methods. We had clear definitions, and the limitations are kind of inherent in any statistical estimation involving modeling. But we did kind of establish our methods in very close conjunction with a team of statisticians from Cambodia and from the US. And we came to the conclusion that this was the best approach we could use for the data that we had. In terms of homeless children, our methods were quite different than for residential care institutions. Because homeless children are likely or are thought to be a highly mobile population, sampling was a big concern here. So in order to cover the main areas we focused on the main areas that were known to have homeless children in Cambodia, and we selected administrative zones across 7 of the larger main cities in Cambodia. And then within each area, we attempted to count all of the homeless children of all ages by working with outreach teams from local NGOs that were part of the Friends International Network. And then this was one of the kind of more innovative aspects of our methods. For 13 to 17-year-old children, we conducted a second independent count to enable a statistical estimation the completeness based on the overlap across counts. And I'm going to go into that a little more. That overlap method is known as capture-recapture. Some of you may have heard this described at other CPC events. This is an illustration of how it works. You conduct 2 separate independent counts on 2 separate days of the same population. And then you compare how many of the children that you counted on day 1 are the same as the children you counted on day 2. So if you think about a pond full of fish and you want to know how many fish are in the pond, you would take a net and, grab the fish, count them, and tag them and put them back into the pond. And then the next day, you would take a net again, take another net full of fish, and see how many in your second catch were tagged, which would give you a sense of what proportion were captured on the first day and also on the second day. So if the overlap between both counts is high, then you have, you know that the first count is pretty close to the true total amount. If the overlap between the first and the second count is low, if there aren't a lot of tagged fish in your second net, then we know that the first count is an underestimate, and you need to use some mathematical methods to adjust for this underestimation. Again, inclusion criteria is quite tricky with homeless children, but our focus was on where children lived rather than, a lot of times street children get considered in the same group as homeless children who are working on the street but not necessarily sleeping on the street are counted as the same population. Consistent with what Rick explained, we were trying to kind of find the gap between who's missed by household surveys. So therefore, for homeless children, we tried to think about which children aren't living in homes, which made us think about the question, what constitutes a home, which is not a straightforward, there's no straightforward answer to that question. Again, we went back to our technical working group, talked about this, and were able to put some criteria. We counted any children sleeping in a public place, any child that was living somewhere with less than 3.5 square meters of covered space per person, which is the SPHERE standards for those of you that work in humanitarian settings, and if they had 2 or more walls made out of plastic sheeting. So here are some photos of places that we did count, children sleeping here would be considered homeless, though, the children living here very much do consider this their home, and they wouldn't necessarily say that they're homeless. This is a home, but for all intensive purposes, I think everyone in this room can agree that this is not a standard home, nor is this the type of setting I visited here. You had to kind of go into this field behind factories. It was quite hard to find these locations, and the National Institute of Statistics does not visit these places as part of their standard census or other household-based data collection methods. So here's another example. This is actually at a construction site. This house has a television, but it's still quite a makeshift temporary shelter. And here's another situation within a slum. So the houses around it would count as adequate housing by our definitions, but the one that's circled, like this woman said, when it rained, she could not sleep in her house. So here are our results. I think that the most, we counted after adjustment 2,156 children that were between 13 and 17 years of age, and this was after adjusting using capture-recapture. We had a very, very low match rate with the capture-recapture. So the number of children from day 1 that were also counted on day 2 was in the single digits in most cities. In Siem Reap, which is where all Angkor Wat and all the temples are, we counted 24 children on day 1 and 25 children on day 2, and only 1 child was the same. So according to capture-recapture methods, that meant we adjusted our figure by a factor of 25, which is very high. So the precision of our estimate is limited. We had to make some very, very high adjustments based on these low match rates. But I think everyone that was involved, we strongly came to the conclusion that regardless of the precision of our final estimate, a single count is inadequate for this population. And we know that a single count was a dramatic underestimate of the number of children that are homeless in Cambodia. So the implication is that data sources in Cambodia that are based on a single count definitely underestimate the number of homeless children. More boys than girls, especially at older ages, which we think is probably due to older girls moving into sex work, though we can't substantiate that from the research we did. And finally, the characteristics and well-being of this population was very low compared, these children face a lot of hardships in terms of labor, in terms of school, in terms of illness. I mean, on all indicators, these children are in urgent need of social services. So I'm going to let Rick conclude now.
So I think, one of the key things that this study has done is up until even 6 months ago, the only sort of numbers that you could go to a politician or to anybody was, that there were approximately 12,000 children in residential care in Cambodia. And now that the number is 49,000. And, it's something. Well, I should say that the 12,000 was just based on administrative data that the government had. So no one had really done this, and this is a work in progress. But I think now that there is something, and this has really helped sort of galvanize, I think, the community around this issue. Another thing was very enlightening to people that work on the ground there is that. Less than 4% of the children in orphanages and residential care institutions in Cambodia were under the age of 5. That they're basically school-age kids, and one of the primary reasons they're there is for education. I think, as Beth mentioned, with homeless children, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think I just want to highlight again that these children, or who these statistics represent, are not. They're invisible to the typical donor-supported population-based surveys. So finally, this is truly my last slide. No pop-ups or anything. I just, one of the things, in addition to the number of children, I think it's also important to point out that children outside of households, just to read what I wrote, it cripples efforts to include the most vulnerable in the post-2015 agenda. And, whether you're talking about the SDG Goal 4, that includes early child development, or 16, and violence. And I guess I just want to sort of leave our presentation, and maybe you have some thoughts, but how there's starting to be more sort of discussions and looking at sort of these children that have dropped off the statistical map, so to speak, in our global statistics. And how might we expand the numbers and types of organizations and research that is actively capturing and sharing reliable data on children outside of family care, and doing it in a sustainable way, that they're not one-off activities. Because there have been a lot of good studies looking at, whether it's street children, other activities with children in residential care and other situations. But often there's not that commitment by the donor community, by governments, to try to establish ways to look at this, to track trends over time. They're often one-off activities. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much. This was definitely a very thought-provoking presentation on many fronts. But for me, the very, very interesting part of it is the methodology that you guys used, and also the policy component of it. How the the action plan came to being, which I would have liked if someone could give a brief presentation, because I think it's important to see how this project kind of was born out of the action plan. But the action plan itself was not just born out of some bureaucrat sitting and coming up with some priorities. That also had a process behind it that led to that becoming a priority, and it's really speaking to a need in the sector. And I think maybe, I don't know, Neil, if you want to talk a little bit for those who are not familiar with the process, how did this priority become a priority? Or Rick, or anyone? Just a quick one, though.
Well, I mean, I think the action plan, it evolved out of within the U.S. government. There's a public law that basically says all foreign assistance for highly vulnerable children is supposed to be comprehensive, coordinated, and effective. And Neil, well, there was an evidence summit on children outside of family care that happened a few years before the action plan was launched, but 1 year before the action plan was launched. And that sort of drove the different agencies in the U.S. government to come together with a common voice, and it was Neil was brought on as a special advisor of this public law and also this initiative. But I think it's grounded in a sort of a holistic look of what it's really about: child development. And if countries are serious about making an investment in children, and all the things that we saw yesterday related to the work that came out of Jamaica, the Heckman studies and things like that, that there's really children need to grow up in safe, nurturing families is kind of the bottom line, and obviously free from violence, exploitation, and proper nutrition. All of those things are interrelated, and that's really where those three objectives came from.
And thanks, Rick. My 30-second response would be that the sector doesn't know how to count. And because it doesn't know how to count, it doesn't get its agenda on things like the MDGs and the SDGs. So a big emphasis in the Action Plan for Children and Diversity was measurement, population level data, moving beyond case management data, which is important in itself. But if you get stuck there, you're going to continually not get yourself integrated into the big picture.
Great point. So with that, we will move to a discussion with our discussant, Florence Martin. So I'll invite her to go to the podium maybe and kind of give us some thoughts on what we heard and challenge us. So Florence is the director of, am I saying it the correct way? Yeah. The director of Better Care Network, which a lot of you are familiar with. She's a human rights lawyer and a clinical social worker with over 2 decades of experience in child protection and child rights in both emergency and development contexts. And it's interesting that she's on this panel with Santi, because she also has a lot of experience in Indonesia, working with the Ministry of Social Affairs, where she pushed for a lot of major reforms on child welfare and social work systems. She's also a global advisor on child protection for Save the Children UK, and also advisor on child protection for the Ministry of Social Welfare in East Timor, and a lot more. I invite Florence to the podium to give us her thoughts.
Do I have to be on the podium?
No. And I do just want to chime in because we're off time here a little bit. So if we could do 7 to 10 minutes of discussion of the discussants' points, and then we will add a little to this session and go till about 12:20. So 20 minutes for Q&A after that.
Perfect. Thanks.
I can. I will sit here. Thank you so much. I think that the first thing that I want to say is it's incredibly wonderful to be sitting in a room full of people who are absolutely passionate about data and who actually think this is really important. And of course, we're talking about this. And I think we assume that this is always the case, but I think, as Neil said, this is not, particularly around the sector of child protection, something that's had the profile that it should. Data is really considered something that other people do, and we don't need it because our cause is so important. And I think what we've seen is a gigantic shift in understanding that we've not made our cases. We've not got, as Neil said, on the agenda. And I think that the US Action Plan certainly shifted that for a lot of us. At the same time, when we're talking, I was thinking of God, multiple data collection systems, multiple indicators, and I think Alain was talking about how do we bring those together. Multiple data systems, often running in parallel. And the question that comes from that is, okay, who's the data for? Who are the users of that data? What is the data for? I mean, we're collecting lots of data now, but what is it for? Is it just for us having our fun, or is it really, who is actually making use of that data? Who determines what data is used or not used? And we talked a little bit about that through the different presentations. And when I think about it and listen to the presentation, Santi talked also about the data system, the administrative data system, and the real weaknesses of that system, and the fact that often the data systems are not connected. And so the two types of data sets that by definition should be connected in order to enable the target beneficiaries to receive access services, or the vulnerable families and children, are simply not connected. Therefore, you're simply not making use of that data in a way that's impactful. But you've got probably two very big departments that are very satisfied that they have data set, just it's not really connected in the way it should. The other part that, from my perspective, was also very important is, when we looked at the different types of data that are being collected, it's not just your population level data, your statistical data. It's also your qualitative data. It's really understanding. It's your community level data that is needed as well to understand what is really happening. But the reality is, so we've got a lot of data that's being collected. Often it's not disaggregated, and often it's not being analyzed. And I think that's something that I wanted to mention, particularly because that's also our experience in Better Care Network. Even in the data that we have collected for quite a few years, and that gets a lot of resources. And my favorite topic, I think Hani alluded to it, is the DHS and the mix, which is receiving enormous amount of resources and support, and has been doing this for an incredible amount of time for over 120 countries now. A lot of the data that is in there and that is being collected is actually not extracted and is not analyzed. And that leads to a number of questions. First of all, it leads to the question of, again, of who is this data for? Are we just collecting data because, or governments are collecting this data because there's an agenda behind? And what is this agenda? Whose agenda are we looking at? I think Rick and Beth have also highlighted the problem is a lot of that data is missing some absolutely key target groups who are not even appearing in the data because of the nature of the data being household-based. So from my perspective, when I was listening to this, I was thinking, okay, we take a child rights perspective. And so we're looking at duty bearers. And a lot of this data is really about states. It's about governments. They have responsibilities. In order to fulfill their responsibilities, they need to know what is happening. They need to know the trends. They need to know, are children receiving the services? Why are children not receiving the services? They need to get that information. Often that information is either hidden in somebody's drawer in the Department of Statistics, or it's not collected. But often there are decisions, they're political decisions, and most of all, they're resources decision as to which data gets collected or not. So the question of who is getting the data and for who, for what purpose, to me is absolutely critical, because it also determines not just what data is collected, but for whom and whether it's being used. We've got a lot of multiple data sets there. This costs money. If the data is really for governments to know and do and fulfill their responsibility and their obligations towards children, families, vulnerable population, then we would expect the governments to have to make some very tough decision about which data do we collect. Are they able to make this decision, or are the people who are driving the data collections are from outside. And we talked about the importance of the SDGs, the MDGs. We know that these are driving the development agenda, as they should. On the other hand, we know that these donors as well are looking at data that's reflecting the information that they need for their own programs. Now, we could argue they need them for their own programs. The government needs as well that data. But are these priorities really being made for the benefit of the vulnerable population? Are we really getting the data that's needed by these population in order to access services and so on? That's a question that I think we need to ask ourselves, because a lot of the data that is being collected is the so-called vital statistics. It's data that's needed for us to understand systems, to us to understand certain impact at the broader population level, very much from a thematic perspective. We need to know maternal health. We need to know death population, mortality, fertility population. Does this in itself tells us really whether vulnerable populations and so on are receiving services? Yes, some of it does. To what extent other data is needed that may not actually be collected through these major data sets initiatives? And not just because they're not in household, but also because actually the data sets are being there to measure other priorities. So one of the questions that I had about this is, so are we targeting through this data collection the right thing? How are we making decision about what data gets collected in a way that really supports the duty bearers? How is the government making decision about what data gets collected? Anyone who knows, for example, the DHS and MIX knows that the decisions are made at the table with the Ministry of Statistics, or the Statistical Institute, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Planning, and then tough decisions are made about what gets included or not. Yeah, tough decision gets made. Now, who's at the table? And how are these decisions about where the resources go, about what we measure, what we don't measure? How are these decisions informed by our understanding of what data is needed for children? So we've got a fragmented picture. We've got a lot more data than we used to, but it's still very fragmented. And I think some of the efforts that we spoke of today were about addressing that fragmentation of data, as in Burkina Faso, understanding how do we bring together these various data systems and these indicators so we have a coherent and integrated understanding of the data that we need as a government. But that's one example. In many places, we're talking about different ways of collecting data that may be good or may not be good, but are being driven by other actors who are seeing those needs. It can be a research institute. It can be a network like Better Care Network. It can be a programmatic organization that needs data. There's a lot of data gathering that is actually informed more by the needs of various actors rather than an integrated understanding of what data is needed to have an impact, to have the services and the policies that target the population in an effective way. So one of the things that I really like about the work in Indonesia, and this is where I'm becoming very biased, of course, because I always really like anything to do with Indonesia, is the fact that we are looking at administrative data. And this is one thing that actually often gets missed in the data discussion, because no one likes administrative data, let's face it. It's complicated, it's never been done well, it's boring, because it's long-term data collection, it's expensive, it means dealing with government systems that are often not willing or not necessarily have the resources to do this, but it's sustainable. But it goes to the core of how do we support governments, the duty bearers, to know the information that they need to know in order to provide the services. So I'm very biased and delighted to hear more about this. And I'm wondering, are we actually focusing in enough countries on the administrative data needs rather than just the statistical data needs, the trends population needs? The other thing is we are looking at it very much still from those vital, I love the word vital statistic. I understand it differently. I think it probably means, I'm not a demographer, so I know it probably means your life and death data. But I also think that vital statistics is the absolutely key data that we need. We can't get every data. We're never going to get all of the data that's needed for vulnerable population. If we pretend that we are, we're living in cuckoo land because the governments and the donors and so on are making strategic decisions. So how do we decide what is the vital statistics? And do we continue to look at these things in silos with the various elements that we looked at, the maternity, and so on, or do we actually make some decision that a lot of this is also data that affects similar population, families, communities, and we need to understand how it integrates better, and how do we measure that integration? And I'm about to finish. So for example, if we look at our countries, the OECD has a very good family database. The OECD, all of our countries actually at the national level, use very important statistics to understand, the various socioeconomic demographic factors that impact families and who are vulnerable families and how they make decisions and what's available to them and so on. That's because that's what the governments in our countries need. OECD countries know they need that data in order to have good policies and services. But right now, we're not really looking at this in developing countries, low or middle income countries. We're looking at it very much still from a siloed perspective. Should we be moving to more integrated data that's really understanding the fact that vulnerable population live in families, live in communities, they're not affected by one issue, they're affected by multiple issues. So are we really looking at the right data? And the right data collection. And because it's very fragmented, should we really be looking at working together with the governments, with all of the donors, the agencies working at the programmatic level, to have a more integrated and strategic thinking about the data that's needed? And that's where I'm looking at Gillian, because we talk about this all the time, and also with Kathleen and others here. Do we need some kind of a data collaborative? Do we need some kind of bringing together the actors, and in particular the duty bearers, to make some decision? Because we keep adding to the data they need to collect, rather than streamlining. And it's all very well, but they're making very difficult decisions on resources. And I can tell you, as all of us know, having worked in Ministry of Social Affairs in 2 countries, if you're looking at who's at the table to decide what data is important, it is not your Ministry of Social Affairs. They're not there. And so the data that probably is absolutely critical for vulnerable population is often not targeted because they're not at the table. So do we need some kind of a global data initiative that is going to start bringing the various sectors and making some realistic decision about the kind of data and bringing together a coherent data system and research agenda that includes both quantitative and qualitative data that can realistically be collected over periods of time, that can be integrated into the administrative data, into the national population level surveys, and into the more qualitative pieces that are needed to understand really what goes beyond the statistics. Do we need some kind of an initiative that brings those data system and that data collection together with a coherent vision and the resource behind them for collecting them? So that would be my challenge.
Great. Thank you very much. Those are very interesting questions and thoughts, and I encourage everyone to kind of continue this discussion beyond this. But at this point, I would like to, even though I personally have lots of questions, but I'm going to curb my enthusiasm, and I'll open for questions. We'll take about 3 or 4 to start with, and then we'll see how much we have time for. Mark, you're managing the...
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Please, go ahead.
Is this on? Yeah. Thank you so much. I can't believe that I'm actually at this stage of my life when data kind of gets my heart rate up, so it's really exciting. Back in, I guess it was 2011 when we did the U.S. Government Evidence Summit on children living outside of family care. The reason for that was because we were trying to find some commonality between the very diverse and large portfolio of U.S. government assistance to vulnerable children overseas, and that included children who are trafficked or children affected by HIV/AIDS, children in child labor and whatnot. And we realized that our commonality was that the most vulnerable children were those living outside of family care. And the Evidence Summit focused on 4 distinct questions, the first of which was how do you identify and enumerate the number of children living outside of family care? So that is what led to Objective 2 of the action plan, which focused on children outside of family care. So it's so exciting to see that this is actually gaining some traction and making some progress. Two questions, one for Rick and I suppose Beth too, is having now this model in Cambodia, what are the efforts to replicate it elsewhere? I mean, we do know that there are some national estimates that Kevin Brown has worked on numbers of children living outside of family care in Europe. But we have Lumos doing some assessments in Haiti and other countries. How do we make sure that these various efforts are similar across place and countries so that we can actually compare them? Two is there's a new report coming out by UNICEF, I think, discussing the administrative data, looking at these issues. And I think the third would be to just comment on Florence's suggestion that we develop some kind of data collaborative. I mean, the fact is we have another 15-year sustainable development agenda with one mention of the word family. For 15 years, really, you're going to reach any target for children without acknowledging the role of family. And so children outside of family care are off the statistical map, off the agenda for the next 15 years. So it's on us, I think, as a community to get extraordinarily organized to make sure that this never happens again. And I welcome your thoughts, Florence, and others about how we can actually really move this beyond a country piloting effort, but to make it a global effort to ensure that children outside of family care are considered a key part of the development agenda moving forward.
Thank you.
Love you though I do, Gillian. I'm going to remind people one question, and let's try to keep it to 30 seconds so that we can get a number in here. Alina.
Are you turning that around? Okay, I'm going to move here. So thank you very much, everyone on the panel. To be very rapid, I guess I'll say I was really impressed by what Rick said about missing up to, you said missing up to a quarter of the lowest wealth quintile through household-based surveys. And so I think not only, time for a global initiative on data, but really along with that, making sure that it's very easy to understand how sampling is done, that methods are well described, that things are described in a way that they're replicable, and that the potential biases that come with that are very well described in the way that our work is written up. And that really links into, I think, the way that a lot of research ends with a call for more research. And so you could be very specific and say, we think that this population is being missed, and actually there's probably administrative or service-based data that could speak to that. So it's not necessarily more research. And I'm happy to share one-on-one, examples that we've used in Zimbabwe, working with childline data, for example, using capture-recapture methods in Palestine. But just, I guess my question building from that is actually with Santi's presentation, because a population that I think about a lot are, people who go to work as maids in other countries and are often completely off the radar. A lot of violations happen in that regard. And I'm wondering, with the work in Indonesia on birth registration and vital statistics, how that could possibly link into another very hidden population. And just one final thought around what was said in terms of the number of homeless children in Cambodia. It's interesting having conversations with colleagues who look at the VAX results from Cambodia and say, when we look at these results, there are conversations that might say, well, sexual violence isn't so much of a problem. And because the rates are lower than we see in other places. And I think that, again, whenever we have to be very careful in what we consider comparable, because there's a number of contextual conditions in each place. There are always people missing. So part of it is figuring out who's missing. So just for our colleagues in Colombia to maybe think about these kinds of things as you go into that process.
You guys are bad. Massimo.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. It was really, really exciting and interesting, and I will ask you questions afterwards. Now, the actual question is on the children living out of family care. If the timing when you did the actual survey, it was during a school break or not, because the stats look a lot like there was maybe a lot of the entities that were sampled and ended up being schools. And your comment about the rationalizing of the data, it's really interesting, and I think that Uganda has a lot of interesting efforts and activities that have been going on ranging from attempts at rationalizing the number of indicators, the formulation of the indicators, and actually using them and developing systems, but at the same time, in a context where the service sector that is overseeing, or they should do something about this data that is collected, is one of the most pathetically underfunded in the country, attracting less than 1% of the national budget. So as on one hand systems are developed, at the other end the local revenue potential of just a birth registration is really one of the very few things that can be extracted from the local government. So the local government does not want to reduce the cost of the birth registration card, and so it's of course more complicated for a practitioner like me working with vulnerable families to get my constituents, my target group registered, and then they disappear. So it's very important that the effort is really aimed at doing something with the information and rationalizing the roles of everybody, and also making clear where the responsibilities sit. Because even if you develop the entire system, but then there's no resources to pay for the airtime of even or the data plans, to upload the data in the system, and so on and so forth, then you remain with a limping mechanism.
Massimo, nice outfit.
Thank you. Thank you. I was trying to impress you all with that. And
I would like to bring it back to the panel, but there were several really interesting comments. So I don't think it's necessary for us to also comment back on the comments, but there were some specific questions. So it'd be great, those who think have something to add, just a quick response so that we have a little bit of time for more questions. Anyone?
Okay. Thank you, Alina, for the question on migration data. That actually will be our next priority, because we realize we should start from somewhere, and because this issue is like not much people want to invest in this issue and to develop such system. Most of the investment actually go to having different programs, having their own surveys and their own way of measuring things, not necessarily building the existing CRVS system within the country. But yes, so because we thought that most of the 169 targets in the SDGs actually rely on us knowing how many people are born, how many people exist, how many people died, and how many people move and where. So that will be our next priority. The comment about local government does not want to eliminate the fee, the admin fee of birth registration, that's true. Although in Indonesia, by end of 2013, actually all of the registration events were made free of charge, but the challenge does not stop from there, because first of all, there's still fine for late registration, so there's still admin sanction for people who register their vital events late. And the second one is that we need to also consider the add cost of registering your vital events, which is very much related to the barriers of the distance and also the transportation, opportunity costs, and everything.
Thank you. Dr. Alain?
Marc, tu peux me reprendre sa préoccupation là? Bon, qu'est-ce qu'elle veut au juste?
Oh, il y a eu énormément de questions. There have been a lot of questions and comments. I'm trying to remember if there were any specific for Burkina Faso. J'essaie de me rappeler s'il y en avait de spécifiques au Burkina. Pas encore.
Non.
Sure, I'll just start. Just a couple of points. I just want to touch on administrative and statistical population-based data, and they're not an either or, and they're both important. Administrative data it's dependent data. It's usually by and for a ministry that has a specific job or duty to do. Population-based data is and often should be done within, for example, it's independent data. For example, in a National Institute of Statistics. And one of the things, specifically to Cambodia, that these new sort of revelations of the magnitude of children outside of family care, it's empowering the Ministry of Social Affairs to go to the Ministry of Economy and Finance and say, we need to build up our administrative database because we have no clue who's in residential care. And even, there's all sorts of issues related to what a boarding school is there, and a lot of it is, there's no clear line of an orphanage and a boarding school, of a residential care. And then just one other thing, and I think, Anita, I think you brought it up about maids, and one of my things that I'm very interested in, and I've did a lot of work in the past on, is child domestic workers, particularly children in hazardous child domestic work. And that's a situation of children outside of family care in households. And I think this very much gets to what Florence is very interested in how can a DHS amidst these routine surveys begin to really pull out some of that kind of information.
Just to,
okay. There are a couple of specific questions about methodology as well. So.
Yeah, just to build on that, Alina, your question, we did some work. We did a reconstructed cohort in a community, and there are categories beyond children in residential care, beyond homeless children, that are still outside the scope of household surveys. And there's domestic workers, there's children working in factories, there's children sleeping in the back of restaurants, and we don't have a great sense now of the scope of those different categories. But we do know from some additional research and from some qualitative discussions, those categories do exist. So this is not comprehensive, but these are two major categories in Cambodia. And other countries might have additional categories. To answer your question just quickly, in school, it was not a school break, though, as Rick alluded to, I think there's a very, very gray area between what is a boarding school, what is a residential care institution. Most of these places, even though they have schools, the children are not going home over summer break or during, maybe they go and stay with family members 1 or 2 weeks a year, but in the vast majority of places we visited, even if it's a school break, these children still live there. And in many cases, they have extremely limited ties to their families, even though their parents are alive.
Maybe the other question was, I think Gillian asked about the replication. What are the thoughts on replication of it?
Il y a eu une question sur la prochaine étape maintenant pour nous tous dans le cadre de, comment on appelle les SDGs en français? Les ODD. So to bring a question to the Burkina Faso process from Gillian's question, how do we move forward? What is the next step in line with the SDGs, which are very limited?
Ok, la prochaine étape, nous sommes, en fait, c'est une recherche. Donc, c'est l'État qui décide de la prochaine étape. Donc, la recherche a été faite. On a remis ça aux autorités. Donc, c'est eux pratiquement qui décident. Je ne sais pas si tu as autre chose à ajouter.
For us, this was a research process, yes, but commissioned by the state. So now that we've thought about what do we want to measure, we've submitted it to the authorities, and they will be thinking about how they want to move forward with this. He's not sure if Al-Ghasimu would like to add something.
In English? Yeah, it is not possible. Yes, I think there is something we plan to do according to the study. The first step is to train the public staff in order to be able to use the new indicators when they have something to report according to the child protection system in Burkina Faso. So that is the first step. The second step is to try to understand if Burkina Faso's actors can only use these indicators like standards. Yeah, because currently we have many indicators, and NGOs are using their indicators, public staff are using their indicators, and we would like to put this, the finding of that study like the standards of official level in Burkina Faso. So we would like to know maybe after 2 years if everybody is able to use that like something official. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, we're out of time. Do you want to?
How's the room feeling? We do have microphones positioned with 3 more questions. We promise to be short. But if we come out of lunch. No groans. Okay, we've got some general nodding. So Gazal, Sandra, and there was one more. And George.
So I'm gonna set a timer. 1 minute. It's gonna start sounding.
Thank you. I'll keep mine very short. For Cambodia, one of the key findings is that education is a driving factor for children being in residential care. How are you using that data to engage with the education sector and with the SDG rollout and ensuring this population group is part of the SDG rollout?
Very quick to Beth or Rick. Regarding the boarding schools, can you get us a sense of how many or the proportion of boarding schools and to what extent there was a strategy for families who are living in remote areas to have access to school and protect their kids? And also in the capture and recapture, did you follow a regular pathway in the second recapture? So, I mean, to guarantee that you have the same geographic coverage?
Yeah, my English is not so good, so you give me 2 minutes. So, Beth, I saw 4 out of 5 of the children in residence have at least one parent. Is there any way you can give us data on the gender of the parents and probably the push and pull factors of children being in residences? Maybe that can give us a way of knowing the kind of methods we can use to integrate some of these children back to their homes.
Thank you very much.
45 seconds. That was great.
That was all, right? Great. Beth, Rick, so like all 3 were targeted to you.
So, first question is education as a driving factor, and how are we using that data? That's been, I think, one of the most important things to come out of this. You know, the Ministry of Education is not always involved in these conversations. I think the traditional response is, oh, we need to support these families. These families are in poverty. And these families are in poverty, but it's not just at the family level. Even if you give this family, you know, a sack of rice every week and some sort of income generating activity, if you don't improve the quality, and it's not just school fees, it's the actual quality of the community schools. So there are community level factors that need to be addressed if you want to stem the kind of demand for residential care in Cambodia. And that's definitely one of the key findings to come out of this work, and the Ministry of Education is joining this conversation. I mean, improving the quality of schools in rural areas is challenging. You know, there's not going to be an easy solution, but I think there's a greater recognition of the complexities and the community level response that's going to be needed to address this issue. How many boarding schools are there in Cambodia? It's so hard to define what a boarding school is. We don't know how many boarding schools there are, but because these institutions really serve a dual purpose in many cases. They're not just a boarding school. They're somewhat like a hybrid institution, really. Very few of them are, none of the ones we encountered are boarding schools the way you might be thinking about it. They really serve they're full caretaking institutions that in many ways basically replace the role of family care. They're not purely serving an educational purpose. From the discussions with children, the interviews with children, education is the main one of the major driving forces. And all of the Cambodians that we talked to said that that's also why we're seeing more boys in these institutions than girls, because parents are sending their boys to get a better education. This is actually seen as an opportunity, which is why they send their boy children and not their girl children. So it's, we're seeing a lot of consistent patterns here. And we're seeing that the children that are there are in school regularly. So it is meeting that desire that the parents have to educate their children, which is good, but also complicates things. Capture, recapture. Yes, we did go to the same geographic areas for the capture, recapture. Can talk more about that. We were even able to GPS map and make sure that our data collectors didn't cheat. So they did go to the exact same geographic areas and yet still encountered very different children on the second count. So, and 4 out of 5 have at least one parent. The gender of the parents, it's not all mothers that have died, if that was sort of what we were getting at. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but many of these children have living mothers and fathers. We do have the breakdown, but it's not an issue of, it's just fathers that don't want, where the mother has died. There's some, I think it's maybe, I would say, about 10% of the children have a father and not a mother, but most of them have mothers. So it's not fully a gendered issue.
Great. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Last thoughts? Rick? Okay.
Just very, very quickly, I think on the boarding school issue, it gets into what I was saying initially about how masterfully Beth sort of pulled people together, because that was one of the key things. With the National Institute of Statistics and other ministries and other stakeholders, how can this be defined from a measurement perspective? So if you have enumerators or people going out to these sites, that you can classify these things. And I think that it is a huge challenge. And I know that you went through many, many iterations, through different groups. Just quickly on education, when these results were released in March in Cambodia, the Global Alliance for Children with the government, we hosted a learning event. And the results were presented, and then we had a panel of experts from different sectors, from education. We also, labor migration is a huge issue, and particularly with children being left with grandparents and that kind of thing. We had people from health, people just focusing on positive parenting, and then it was a discussion. We had about 80 people in the room from different sectors as well. And it was the beginning of a discussion of, what do these findings mean, particularly on the drivers of the child, like why children were ending up in institutions. What do these findings mean from your sector's perspective? And so that it was a start, but it was a terrific half-day event, and people really got into it. And I think, it's a start of, how do you begin to bring in education and these other sectors into something that is kind of been viewed, traditionally as more of a child protection, child welfare issue, a topic. So.
Great. Thank you very much. Anyone has any burning last comments that they want to make? Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Just to wrap up, I feel like there were several calls made during this panel. One of them was a call for a global initiative on data, which was very interesting, talking about kind of replicating these activities in other contexts and countries, and also making sure that we are not missing certain kind of fragments of children. I just want to also add another call which was discussed in the past, and that is making sure that this data is being used to improve the lives of children. And I think that that's part of what we also need to study. How and why, if they're being used or not, they're being used, and how they're being used in improving the lives of children, and rather than being shelved somewhere. So I think that on its own is a research agenda that we haven't been doing a very good job at. Thank you, everyone. And yes, we will come back at 1:45. You will announce that.
1:45, yes. Thank you, Hani, and the panelists. I'm really glad that we had this discussion before lunch, because this one clearly got people talking, and it's something that you can discuss as you make your merry ways to lovely spots around campus to eat.